Her hands were shaking, not from fear, not from nerves. Her hands were shaking because she was on her knees on the marble floor of the most expensive event hall in the city, in a wedding gown that cost more than she used to make in 6 months. And she was scrubbing. She was scrubbing wine off the floor on her wedding day. The red stain spread wide and dark across the white marble. She pressed the cloth in and pushed. Back and forth. Back and forth. Her mascara tracked down the sides of her face in 2 slow, elegant rivers. Champagne glasses clinked in the ballroom above. Someone laughed too loud. Guests were arriving. A wedding cake stood 6 tiers tall in the main hall. And down here, in this side corridor no one was supposed to see, Aaliyah Monroe was on her knees. The woman who had put her there stood over her, in $3,000 heels, Victoria Caldwell. Mother of the groom. A smile on her face constructed over decades to look like warmth while delivering cruelty. A girl like you, Victoria said softly. Being allowed to walk into a Caldwell ceremony is the greatest privilege of your small, pathetic life. Clean it. Every drop. Or this wedding ends before it begins. Julian stood at the entrance. Aaliyah's soon-to-be husband. He looked at her and looked away. Just do what she says, he said. Don't embarrass us. The corridor went quiet, and Aaliyah pressed the cloth harder into the marble. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Just barely. Just for a fraction of a second. A ghost of a smile that disappeared before it fully arrived. Her left hand found the phone hidden in the inner seam of her dress, the pocket she had sewn herself 3 days ago. She had planned for this exact moment. Her thumb pressed the screen once. Victoria Caldwell thought she was standing over a broken girl with no family, no money, no options. She had no idea she was standing over the architect of her own destruction. But first, you need to understand how we got here. Wherever you're watching from, share it with everyone in the comments. And if stories like this touch your heart, subscribe and stay with us. The bakery didn't have a sign. It didn't need one. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it. The smell reached you half a block away, bread and butter and something faintly sweet that made you slow your walk without meaning to. The storefront was small. The painted letters above the window had faded years ago. But the light inside was always warm, and the door was always open before sunrise. Aaliyah Monroe ran the place herself. Had been running it since she was 19, when the woman who raised her first admitted her knees couldn't take the standing anymore. She was 24 now. She knew the weight of every bag of flour before she lifted it. She knew which oven ran 3 degrees hot. She knew every regular customer by name and by order. And she remembered the ones who were having a hard month and quietly made their bag a little heavier. She was not rich. She was not connected. She did not own much. But she moved through her small world with a kind of quiet authority that people felt without being able to name it. A stillness. A groundedness. Like someone who had already survived the worst thing that was going to happen to her and no longer carried the weight of fearing it. In the back of the bakery, in the small apartment above the shop, lived the woman who had made her that way. Her name was Ruth. Ruth Monroe had a face full of scars. They covered the left side of her face, pulling the skin tight around her jaw and temple. They ran down her neck and across her left hand and forearm in patterns that told a story she had never, in 20 years, fully told. She wore long sleeves in summer. She kept her hair short, so it would not catch on the textured ridges of her cheek. Children sometimes stared. She let them. She had made peace with being looked at. Aaliyah had never asked about the scars. Not once. Not because she didn't wonder, she did. Sometimes, in the way you wonder about things that feel too sacred to press on directly. But she had understood from very young that Ruth's body was not a mystery to be solved. It was a life to be honored. She brought Ruth her tea at 7 every morning. She sat with her through the slow afternoons when the arthritis made everything difficult. She read to her in the evenings novels, mostly the kind with long sentences and complicated families. And when Ruth laughed, which she did more than you might expect, Aaliyah laughed with her. and the small apartment above the bakery felt like the fullest place in the world. Then there was Daniel. Daniel Carter ran the machine repair shop directly across the street. He had been there for 4 years, a tall man in a worn work apron, always slightly oil-stained, always doing something with his hands. A mechanical engineer by training, overqualified for the work he did, and completely unbothered by that fact. He came in every morning at 6:45. Black coffee, 1 honey roll, exact change. He asked how Ruth was doing every single time, even on the days when it was just courtesy and they both knew it. Aaliyah noticed him the way you notice something that is consistently, quietly in the right place. She didn't examine it beyond that, and he kept his distance, because she had never given him a signal that she wanted less of it. 20 years ago, someone had done something in a burning building. Aaliyah did not remember it clearly. She was 4 years old. What she had was less a memory than an impression, heat and noise, and the smell of smoke so thick it seemed solid, and then arms around her, and movement, and the sensation of being carried through something terrible by someone who refused to let go. She remembered an eye. Just one, because the other was squeezed shut against the smoke. Dark, steady, refusing to show fear even then. That eye had always lived at the back of her consciousness, quiet, watching, reminding her, in the moments when she wanted to give up or give in, that someone had once walked into fire to keep her alive. She did not know why. She did not know who had done it to whom, or who had started what, or why a building had been burning in the first place. She only knew that Ruth had pulled her out, and that Ruth's body had paid the price, and she had decided, very young and very privately, that she would spend her life being worth it. Ruth's decline was not sudden. It had been coming for over a year, the way these things come, quietly, and then all at once. The tiredness that didn't respond to rest, the appetite that fell away like leaves, the moments where Ruth would look at something just past Aaliyah's shoulder with an expression that had nothing to do with the room they were in. By late spring, she was mostly in bed. Aaliyah hired a part-time helper for the bakery so she could be upstairs more. She kept the tea ritual. She kept the reading. She held Ruth's scarred hand in the evenings and did not talk about what they both knew was happening. And then one night in early June, Ruth asked her to open the small cedar box at the bottom of the wardrobe. The box was old. The hinges were slightly tarnished. Inside, resting on a square of faded velvet, was a necklace, a gold chain, with a pendant in the shape of a family crest. Intricate, detailed, clearly old money. The kind of object that carries history in its weight. Aaliyah had never seen it before. "Sit down, baby," Ruth said. Her voice was steadier than her body. It had always been that way. "There are things I should have told you a long time ago," she began, "and I didn't. Because I was afraid. I told myself it was to protect you, and that was true. But I also have to be honest with you now. At the end, I was afraid for myself too. Afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd go looking for it, and they would find you before I could keep you safe." Aaliyah sat very still. "You are not my daughter by blood," Ruth said. "You never have been. You came to me the way things come to people who are in the right place at the right time, which is to say, you came through fire." She paused, breathed. "Your father was a man named Gerald Monroe. A good man, a wealthy man. He built something real, a trust, an estate, something that was always meant to be passed on. He had a business partner, a man named Caldwell, and that man's wife, Ruth's jaw tightened, just slightly. Just for a moment decided that the easiest way to inherit everything was to make sure there was no one left to challenge it. She arranged the fire. Her husband was already gone by then. She ran the operation herself. Aaliyah's hands were in her lap. She did not move them. "The fire was not an accident," Ruth said. "I was the housekeeper. I knew what was coming. Because I had ears, and I had paid attention. I got you out. I ran with you as far as I could run, and then I kept going. I changed your name. I changed mine. I disappeared with you into the kind of life where no one looks. The necklace lay in the box between them, catching the lamplight. "I am giving you this now," Ruth said, "because it is time. The crest is the Monroe family seal. Any lawyer worth his salt who deals in estate law will know it on sight. There is a trust that has been frozen locked, legally, because the heir was never found. It has been sitting for 20 years, compounding, untouched. I don't know what it's worth. Now, I don't want you to think about that. I want you to think about justice." She looked at Aaliyah with those eyes steady, clear, unafraid even now. There was a young man, Julian Caldwell, the son of the woman who ordered everything. His family arranged a betrothal with your father when you were both very small, a social contract, the way those families did things. The son doesn't know what his mother did, or perhaps he does and has chosen not to see it. Either way, if you show them that crest, if you show them who you are, they will have to receive you, and the trust will activate. Aaliyah was quiet for a long time. "Why are you telling me to walk into that family?" she finally asked. Ruth looked at the window, at the dark outside. "Because," she said carefully, "I always believed that if you walked in the front door, in daylight, with the crest around your neck and the law on your side, they wouldn't dare touch you." She believed that. Completely. What Ruth did not know, could not have known, was that Victoria Caldwell was not a cautious socialite to be navigated with grace and paperwork. She was the architect. She was the one who had given the order, 20 years ago, while she stood in another corridor of another elegant building and made a phone call she had never regretted. Ruth Monroe died 8 days later. Aaliyah buried her quietly. She kept the necklace around her neck. She went back to the bakery the morning after the funeral and made the bread. Because the bread needed to be made, and because standing still was not something she knew how to do. Daniel put a bunch of white dahlias outside the door of the shop before she opened. No note. Just the flowers, in a plain glass jar with water, sitting on the step. She looked at them for a long time before she went inside. She found the Caldwell address without much difficulty. She dressed carefully. Not to impress, she had never cared much about impressing people, but to be taken seriously. The necklace rested at her collarbone, visible and unambiguous. She took the bus. She walked the last 3 blocks through a neighborhood where the hedgerows were perfectly trimmed and the driveways could fit 4 cars with room to spare. The Caldwell house was not a house. It was a statement. White columns, iron gates, sculpted grounds that had the effortlessness of things maintained by people who are paid never to let the effort show. She rang the bell. She did not expect what came next. Victoria Caldwell opened the door herself, which surprised her. The woman was immaculate. Silver-streaked hair pinned back. A dress that was casual in the way that requires significant money. A smile that arrived faster than human warmth should allow. "Oh, my goodness," Victoria said. Her eyes had dropped immediately to the necklace, and something had moved behind them fast, controlled, immediately shuttered. "What a beautiful piece. Come in. Come in. You must be Aaliyah." She could not have known the name, not unless she already knew exactly who Aaliyah was. She did. She had known the moment she saw the crest. Victoria Caldwell led her through rooms of burnished wood and important art, and settled her in a sitting room with tea already being prepared, as though the visit had been expected. She asked gentle questions. She touched Aaliyah's arm twice. She smiled in a way that felt like sunlight, warm, encompassing, slightly blinding. Aaliyah answered the questions. She watched the woman's hands. Julian appeared. He was handsome. He was polished. He shook her hand firmly and said he had heard her family's name growing up, and that it was remarkable, truly remarkable, that they were finally meeting. He seemed genuinely charmed by her. He said things that sounded very much like things a man says when he wants to be believed. She was not uncharmed. She was cautious. She was always cautious with charm, because she had grown up without it, and therefore never confused it for substance. Within 40 minutes of her arrival, before she had finished her first cup of tea, the conversation had moved naturally, lightly, as though by accident, to the subject of the betrothal, the family tradition. The alignment of names and histories. Julian looked at her with something that seemed like genuine interest. Victoria clasped her hands together with what seemed like genuine delight. "Of course," Victoria said warmly, "a union like this, after all this time, it would be deeply meaningful. For the family, for the trust." And there was the word. The trust, said lightly, parenthetically, as though it were simply one of many reasons this was a lovely idea. Aaliyah did not react. She took a small sip of her tea. 3 hours later, after she had left and the iron gate had closed behind her, and she was 3 blocks away in the afternoon sun, she stopped walking and stood very still on the sidewalk. She had come to them with a necklace and a name. She had not come to them with lawyers or documentation or anything that could be verified in a courtroom. She had been, objectively, vulnerable, and within 40 minutes, they had begun steering her toward marriage. That was not warmth. That was a calculation. She started walking again. Faster. Back at the Caldwell house, in the kitchen, Victoria was on the phone. Her voice was low. Her expression was the one she wore when no one was watching. Stripped of the warmth. Precise as a scalpel. People who knew Victoria Caldwell only in public assumed she had been born to this life. The pearls. The gown. The ease. They were wrong. She had married into it at 26. Married a man named Charles Caldwell, who had money and a name and a business partnership with Gerald Monroe that was supposed to make all of them wealthy. And for a time, it had, until Gerald started pulling away from the arrangement. Until Gerald rewrote the terms of their joint holdings. Until Gerald, slowly and legally and with complete procedural correctness, began consolidating his assets into a trust that excluded Charles entirely. Charles had taken it badly. Victoria had taken it personally. Charles died of a heart attack 11 months before the fire stress, the doctors said, though Victoria had her private opinions about what grief and humiliation did to a man's body. And after the funeral, when Victoria sat alone with the full picture of what they had been left and what they should have had, something in her resolved into something very cold and very clear. She had spent the last 20 years building everything she now had from the wreckage of what Gerald Monroe had taken from her. Or so she told herself. The fact that Gerald had taken nothing that was rightfully theirs was a detail she had long since stopped examining. "The girl is real," she said into the phone. "The crest is real. The trust will activate when she marries into the family." A pause. "Yes. All of it. The full amount. 20 years of compounding interest on $1 billion principal. Do you have any idea what that number looks like now?" Another pause. She was listening. "The arrangement is straightforward," she said. "There is a clause, the standard one we had drawn up for situations like this. If either party initiates divorce within the first 6 months, the assets transfer entirely to the other. We simply need to make the marriage so intolerable that she files first. She walks away. The money stays." She smoothed the front of her dress with her free hand. "Julian will manage her. She has no family, no lawyers, no one who knows what she's worth." She glanced at the window. "We'll have a contract ready within the week. She'll sign it because she'll want to prove she's not marrying for money. They always do." She was right about that. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon in a Caldwell family attorney's office, Aaliyah signed a prenuptial agreement that stated clearly, in the event that she, Aaliyah Monroe, initiated a divorce within the first 6 months of marriage, she would forfeit all claims to marital assets, including any connected financial instruments or trusts. She signed it because Ruth had told her to come here with dignity, not greed. She signed it because she thought it was what a woman of integrity would do. She signed it because she was still, in this one way, exactly what they believed her to be, someone who had grown up without money and therefore could not fully imagine what the number meant. That evening, in the Caldwell sitting room, Victoria looked at the signed document and permitted herself a single, quiet smile. Julian poured himself a drink. "Now we begin," Victoria said. 6 months. We make her life here unbearable. We press on every insecurity, every wound, every place where she is soft. And when she can't take it anymore, when she's desperate enough to walk away, we let her go. With nothing, Julian swirled his glass. He did not look entirely comfortable with this, but he had never, not once in 32 years, managed to want something different than what his mother wanted. "What about the orphan angle?" he asked. Victoria stood. "That's the beauty of it. No family means no one to call. No one to come looking. No lawyers on retainer. She is entirely alone." She walked toward the door. "And alone is exactly where we need her to stay." She paused at the threshold, one hand on the frame. "Just like her father," she said. "Alone at the end." She didn't look back. The door swung softly shut. The engagement was announced on a Thursday. By Friday morning, the Caldwell social circle had already begun treating Aaliyah the way certain kinds of people treat anyone they consider beneath them, not with open cruelty, not yet, but with that brand of warmth that is really just condescension wearing a better coat. Women who had known Victoria for decades air-kissed Aaliyah on both cheeks at charity lunches and asked questions about her little shop with the exact smile reserved for things that are quaint. Julian's friends shook her hand and made jokes she wasn't fully included in. She was invited everywhere and made to feel welcome nowhere. Julian was attentive in public. In private, he was absent. Not unkind, exactly more like indifferent in the way that is somehow worse than unkind, because indifference at least doesn't try to hide itself. He was always going somewhere. Always on his phone. Always in a meeting she hadn't been told about. He would look at her sometimes across a room with an expression she couldn't read, and then look away before she could try. She kept the bakery open. She insisted on that. Victoria had suggested, twice, with flawlessly disguised contempt, that a woman in Aaliyah's new position didn't need to be waking up before dawn to make bread. Aaliyah had smiled and changed the subject both times. She needed the bakery. Not for the money, she wasn't thinking about money. She needed it because it was the one place where she knew exactly what she was doing and why, where her hands had a purpose, where the outcome of her efforts was visible and real and warm. She also needed it because Daniel was across the street. She had not told him about the engagement right away. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because saying it out loud to him specifically felt like a thing she wasn't ready for. Maybe because she already sensed, in some wordless way, that his reaction would tell her something she didn't want to hear yet. She told him on a Wednesday, 3 weeks in, when he brought back a tray she'd lent him for a shop birthday. She said it plainly, the way she said most things. He listened. His face did not change. Not really, but something behind his eyes went very still, like a lake the moment before it freezes. "Okay," he said. That was all. He put the tray on the counter. He thanked her for the coffee. He left. That evening, Aaliyah stood at the bakery window and watched the light go out in the shop across the street later than usual. Much later, like someone who was sitting in the dark thinking about something he could not unthink. She didn't sleep well that night either. Meanwhile, in the Caldwell house, the plan was already in motion. Victoria had brought in people she trusted, a small, efficient circle of Julian's cousins and family friends who understood the terms of loyalty in houses like this one. The strategy was meticulous. It did not rely on any single act of cruelty, but on a sustained, grinding campaign of humiliation, disguised as high expectations. Aaliyah would be given responsibilities she hadn't been prepared for. She would be corrected in public. She would be excluded from decisions about her own wedding, while being blamed for its imperfections. Her background, the bakery, the foster home, the absence of a notable family name would be referenced constantly, always obliquely, always with a smile. The goal was not to break her spirit. The goal was to make her feel so small, so exhausted, so alone inside this marriage, that filing for divorce felt like the only way to breathe. 6 months. That was all they needed. After that, the trust clause would expire. And even if she stayed, they could manage her. But before 6 months was up, she needed to ask to leave. And Victoria Caldwell had never yet met a woman she couldn't make want to leave. It was a Thursday night, 11 days before the wedding. Daniel had stayed late in the shop. He did that sometimes when a job was complicated or when he needed to think, and lately he'd been needing to think more than usual. He had the radio on low. The overhead light threw long shadows across the workbench. He was in the middle of rebuilding a compressor when he heard voices through the thin shared wall between his back workshop and the adjoining suite, the Caldwell family lawyer's office, which occupied the connected unit on the same floor of the building. He stopped working. He knew Julian's voice. He'd heard it a handful of times when Julian had come to pick Aaliyah up from the bakery. Always in an expensive car. Always in a hurry. The other voice was a woman's, older, controlled, the kind of voice that expects to be listened to. He couldn't make out every word. The wall was thick and the radio was on. But he caught enough. He caught the phrase, 6 months. He caught the phrase, walk away, with nothing. He caught Julian say her name, Aaliyah, in the flat, factual tone of someone discussing a transaction. And he caught the older woman's voice say, quietly, and without any particular emotion, something about resolving the father the same way, years ago. He stood very still at the workbench for a long time after the voices faded. Then he set down his tools, turned off the radio, turned off the light. He walked across the street. The bakery was closed, the front dark, but the light above the shop was on. He went around back and knocked on the door that led to the stairwell. He knocked twice, evenly, which was how she always knew it was him and not someone she needed to worry about. She opened the door in an old sweater and paint-stained jeans, a mug of tea in her hand, and whatever she saw on his face made her step back and let him in without a word. He sat down at the small table in her kitchen. She sat across from him. He told her everything he'd heard, and he didn't soften it or work up to it. He told it plain, the way she would have wanted it told. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. They killed your father, he said, and his voice did something on those words that he couldn't quite control. And now they're trying to take what he left behind, using you to unlock it, and then pushing you out before you can claim it. He leaned forward. Aaliyah, you cannot walk into that house. She was looking at her mug. And the contract I signed? She said, I don't know if it holds. But I know you need a real lawyer, not their lawyer. Not anyone they've touched before you take one more step. She was quiet for another moment. Then she looked up at him, and something in her expression shifted not toward fear, not toward grief, but toward something more focused and more dangerous. She said, Daniel. He waited. I have been wearing that necklace for 3 weeks, she said slowly. I have been in that house, at those dinners, sitting across from that woman, and I want to tell you something. She set down her mug. I know. I've known something was deeply wrong since the second cup of tea. He stared at her. The way she looked at the crest, Aaliyah said. The way the conversation moved to marriage within 40 minutes. The prenuptial contract which, yes, I signed. And yes, I understand now why they needed me to sign it. The way Julian looks at me like I am a problem he has been assigned to manage. She paused. I didn't have all the pieces. I have them now, because of what you just told me. But I knew the shape of it. Then why he stopped himself. Started again. Why are you still going through with it? She looked at him steadily. Because if I run, she said, they walk away clean. They have committed fraud. They have committed murder. They have been holding an estate that does not belong to them for 20 years, and they have done it by making sure there was no one left to challenge them. She shook her head. Very slightly. I am not letting them walk away clean. He opened his mouth. She held up one hand. I know what you want to say, she said. And her voice was not harsh, but it was absolutely certain. You want to say that money isn't worth my safety. You want to say that we can find another way. You want to say, and hear something in her voice softened, just for a breath, that you would rather I was poor and alive than rich and in danger. He didn't deny it. I know, she said. I know exactly who you are, Daniel Carter, and that matters to me more than I have told you. She looked at her hands. But this is not about the money. My father built something real. Ruth gave everything she had, including her body, including 20 years of her life, to keep me alive long enough to claim it. I owe them both more than running. She looked back at him. What I need, she said carefully, is not someone to rescue me. What I need is a partner. Someone who trusts that I know what I'm doing and helps me do it. The kitchen was still. Outside, a car passed. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere above them, the old building shifted. In the way old buildings do, Daniel looked at her for a long time. Then he exhaled, slow, controlled, and leaned forward with his elbows on the table. Tell me the plan, he said. She talked for 2 hours. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had always privately respected about him. He did not jump ahead. He did not try to fix things before she had finished building them. He sat with the complexity of what she was laying out. And when she paused, he nodded. And when she was done, he was quiet for a moment that felt less like hesitation and more like calculation. Then he said, "Walk me through the 3 parts again." She did. The plan had 3 components, running simultaneously, invisible to the Caldwells at every point. The first was Daniel's. He had equipment in the shop, thermal imaging tools, data recovery hardware, forensic-grade software he used for industrial accident analysis that could, with the right inputs, reconstruct physical events from archived environmental data. The city kept thermal and atmospheric records going back 30 years for insurance and structural purposes. He knew which databases to access. He knew how to read what they held. He had 7 days. The fire was 20 years ago, Aaliyah said. Will there be anything left? Records don't burn, he said. If it was a structure fire, there's an incident report. If there was an investigation, there are files. If the investigation was closed or never opened, that tells us something too. He was already thinking through it. She could see. And if there were accelerant patterns, if the fire behaved unnaturally, the thermal data will show it. These things leave a signature. You just have to know how to read it. She nodded. The second component was hers, and it required the most patience. She had sent photographs of the crest to Raymond and Associates twice already, the law firm named on the original trust documentation, buried in papers Ruth had kept at the bottom of that cedar box. Both times, no response. The firm's intake team had received the images from an unknown sender, with no accompanying documentation. Without context, without the heir presenting in person, a photograph of an old pendant was not sufficient to open a 20-year frozen estate file. It had been logged and shelved. She needed to send it one final time, but this time to Raymond Osei's personal emergency line, the direct contact printed in the original trust documents themselves, reserved exclusively for the Monroe heir. And she needed to send it with context impossible to ignore. Herself. At the wedding, the crest visible, the Caldwell name on every document surrounding her. Let the scene speak. Let him understand in a single image what 20 years of waiting had been building toward. The wedding, Daniel said. The wedding. She confirmed. They need the ceremony completed to trigger the trust activation. Julian's family will make sure every step of the legal marriage process is documented, which means the moment I walk into that hall, there will be a paper trail confirming exactly who I am and where I am. She looked at him evenly. I'm going to use their documentation against them. The third component was the hardest, not logistically, but personally. She had to walk into that house. She had to stand at that altar. She had to endure whatever they put her through between now and the moment Raymond's team arrived, and she had to do it without flinching, without retaliating, without giving them any ammunition to use against her in the legal proceedings that would follow. She could not leave. She could not fight back in the way her body wanted to. She had to absorb it. Because the worse they behaved, the stronger her case. If they push you too far, Daniel started. They won't push me too far, she said. I know exactly where my line is. I need you to tell me a signal, he said. Something I can see from inside. I'll be there. I know the owner of the catering company they're using. He owes me a favor. I'll work the setup crew. Stay close. She thought about it. 3 slow blinks, she said. If I look at you and blink 3 times, slowly, You pull the emergency brake on everything. You call it in early. You get people there faster. You come through the door. And if I don't see you? You'll see me, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then, with a deliberateness that she understood was meaningful, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Not a grasp, not a grip, just a weight, a presence. I need you to understand something, he said quietly. I'm not doing this because I think you need protection. You've made it very clear you don't need that kind of help. A beat. I'm doing this because what is happening to you is wrong, and I refuse to watch something wrong happen to someone He stopped. She waited. He didn't finish the sentence. Not with words. But she understood it. She turned her hand over. Just slightly, so that her fingers rested against his palm. 7 days, she said. 7 days, he agreed. He stood up to leave. At the door, he paused with his hand on the frame, and she saw his shoulders do something. A small, involuntary tension, like a man steadying himself against something heavy. Aaliyah, he said, without turning around. I know, she said. He left. She sat at the kitchen table for a while longer, with her empty mug. The necklace was warm against her sternum. Outside, the street was quiet and dark. They had built a trap for an orphan. What they had actually built was a stage, and in 11 days, the curtain was going up. The morning of the wedding arrived cold and bright. Aaliyah was up at 4, the way she always was. She made bread. She didn't need to. The bakery was closed for the day, and she had no customers to feed. But she needed her hands to be doing something familiar before they were asked to do something very difficult. She kneaded dough in the dark kitchen and thought about Ruth, and about her father who she had never known, and about the kind of justice that takes 20 years to arrive and arrives, when it finally does, like something inevitable. She dressed herself. She had refused Victoria's offer of a bridal suite at a hotel, refused the professional hair and makeup team, refused the entourage of Julian's cousins who had been offered as bridesmaids in a way that felt more like surveillance than celebration. She did her own hair. She did her own face. She put on the dress, which was beautiful, genuinely beautiful. A thing she had chosen herself in a shop where no one knew her name. And she fastened the necklace at her throat, and she looked at herself in the mirror for a long, steady moment. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who knew where she was going and why. The venue was a converted estate on the north side of the city. Grand, ornate, the kind of place that charges by the hour for the privilege of being beautiful inside it. When Aaliyah arrived, the preparations were already in full orchestrated chaos. Florists, caterers, coordinators with earpieces barking information at one another. Julian's family moved through it all like they owned it, because in every way that mattered to them, they did. She was taken to a small side room to wait. No one explained who would come for her or when. No one brought her water. She sat on a velvet chair in the corner and waited, perfectly still, which was the thing she had always been best at. 2 of Julian's cousins arrived an hour before the ceremony. They were polished women with tight smiles who had been friendly to her face at every dinner and systematically excluded her from every meaningful conversation. They fussed around the room with a performance of helpfulness that was actually the opposite, moving things just out of her reach, commenting on her hair in a way that sounded like a compliment until you played it back, suggesting twice that her dress ran a little large through the waist, which it did not. She let them talk. She watched them. She didn't react, not because she didn't feel it, but because she understood something by now that they would never understand about her. She wasn't here for them. She was here for the event, the legal, documented, witnessed event that was going to trigger a trust, expose a crime, and end the Caldwell family's 20-year run of uncontested corruption. Everything they threw at her between now and that moment was just noise. 1 hour before the ceremony, Victoria arrived. She was already in her champagne gown. She looked at Aaliyah in the chair, and something shifted in her face, a recalibration, like a woman deciding mid-step how hard to push. She decided. Hard. The flowers for the arch are wrong, Victoria announced to the room at large. Someone ordered the wrong variety. We need to fix this immediately. She looked at Aaliyah. The florist needs to be spoken to. Go and sort it out. One of the cousins stifled something. Aaliyah stood up. She went and found the florist. There was nothing wrong with the flowers. She came back and reported this. Victoria looked at her as though she had failed a test. The table arrangements, then. The third table from the left has an asymmetry. It needs to be corrected. She went. The third table was fine. She came back. And then something happened that was not in anyone's plan. Julian was standing in the corridor outside the prep room when she returned from the tables. Alone for once, without his mother nearby, and without an audience. He was looking at his phone, and when she walked past, he looked up, and for a moment, just a moment, something crossed his face that was not the performance. Not the polished indifference or the practiced charm or the flat transactional look she had catalogued over weeks of dinners. It was something closer to shame. "Aaliyah," he said. She stopped, waited. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. Whatever he had intended to say, warning, apology, confession, she would never know, collapsed before it reached his voice. He shook his head slightly, the way a man does when he has chosen, again, the easier thing. "Nothing," he said. "Never mind." He walked back toward the ballroom. She watched him go. There had been something real in him for about 4 seconds, and he had swallowed it whole, the way people do when they have practiced swallowing things for 32 years, and the reflex is faster than the intention. She filed it away. Not with contempt. With something closer to pity, the efficient, clear-eyed kind that has no warmth in it. Victoria had moved on. She was now directing one of the caterers with the focused energy of a woman who had found her medium. But she continued, throughout the next 30 minutes, to send Aaliyah on tasks. All of them pointless. All of them constructed to keep her moving, to keep her in a subordinate posture, to make her visible to arriving staff and early guests in the role of someone who fetches and corrects and serves. Aaliyah did each one without complaint and returned without hurry. And then came the wine. 2 of the cousins were carrying a display of champagne and red wine through the corridor, when one of them, not entirely accidentally, not entirely on purpose, in that territory of deliberate clumsiness that certain people have perfected, misjudged the width of the doorway, and the tray tilted, and 3 glasses of dark red wine went across the marble corridor floor, in a spreading bloom. The silence afterward was a specific kind. Victoria appeared at the end of the corridor. She looked at the wine on the floor. She looked at Aaliyah. She looked at the cousins who were already stepping back, away, out of the frame. "Clean it up," Victoria said. No one moved for a moment. "There are staff," one of the cousins started. "Not staff," Victoria said, without looking away from Aaliyah. Her. And there it was. The thing they had been building toward. All the small humiliations, all the pointless errands, all the systematic exclusion they had been infrastructure, foundation work. This was the structure they'd been building to. This was the moment designed to break her. Victoria picked up a cloth from the serving cart, a clean linen cloth, the kind meant for table settings, and held it out. "Before the guests arrive," she said, her voice soft and absolute, "or this wedding ends right here." Julian appeared at the end of the opposite corridor. He looked at the scene. He looked at his mother. He looked at Aaliyah. He looked away. "Just do what she says," he said. "Don't make this worse." And Aaliyah, this woman in the beautiful dress, with the necklace at her throat, in the corridor of a house built on the money that belonged to her father, she took the cloth. She looked at it for a moment. Then she crouched down and began to clean. And the corner of her mouth moved. Just barely. Just for a fraction of a second. The same ghost of a smile from the opening of this story. The same one no one in this corridor would ever be able to describe afterward, because it was gone before it finished arriving. Her left hand, inside the folds of the skirt, found the phone. Her thumb pressed the screen. One tap, The photograph she had taken of herself 3 minutes earlier, while the cousins were still arranging the wine display, before anyone had been looking, was sent. Herself, in the dress, in the corridor, the necklace visible and clear at her collarbone, the Caldwell family crest above the main door visible in the background. Everything Raymond needed to understand in a single frame. Raymond Osei's personal emergency line. Not the firm's intake address. His direct account, the one printed in ink on the original trust documents. Reserved exclusively for the Monroe family heir. Sent. Then she kept cleaning. Victoria watched from above with the satisfied stillness of a woman who believes she has won. The door at the end of the corridor opened. Daniel stepped through, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who belonged in a catering uniform. He looked at the scene without a word. Without a word, he walked to where Aaliyah was and crouched down beside her. And he took the cloth from her hands. And he finished the job himself, his jaw set and his hands steady. Victoria stared at him. "Who are you?" she said. "Nobody," he said. "Just cleaning the floor. Get him out," Victoria said to the cousins. "Now. Before I have security, remove him myself." They moved toward him. He stood. He didn't resist. There was no reason to resist. Not yet. But before he walked back toward the door, he looked at Aaliyah. Just once. Just for a second. And she looked back at him. No words. No signal. Just two people in a hallway who understood. Completely. And without any ambiguity. Exactly what was happening. And exactly what came next. The door closed behind him. Outside, in the grey morning air, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands were absolutely steady now. The kind of steady that comes not from the absence of emotion but from the presence of complete commitment. The screen showed a notification from the recovery software he'd left running overnight. Data restoration complete. 847 files recovered. Thermal imaging confirmed. Accelerant signature verified. Matches commercial grade, not residential. Definitive evidence of deliberate ignition. Below that, a name, a date. A payment record, recovered from a 20-year-old archived financial database. He dialed. It rang twice. "Detective Marsh," said the voice on the other end. "This is Daniel Carter," he said. "I have forensic evidence in a 20-year-old arson and homicide case. The suspect is currently in a wedding venue at he gave the address, and the victim's heir is inside that building right now." He paused. "I need you to move fast. And I need you to bring someone from the estate fraud division." A pause. "How solid is the evidence?" Daniel looked at the venue. At the white columns and the iron gates and the careful, expensive beauty of everything the Caldwell family had built on top of what they'd taken. "Solid enough," he said. Raymond Osei had been in the air for 11 hours. He was 63 years old. He had been practicing estate law for 38 of those years, and he had spent the last 20 of them doing exactly one thing that had nothing to do with his other clients waiting. He had set up systems. He had left instructions. He had maintained a legal hold on a trust that everyone around him quietly assumed would never be claimed. And he had never, not once, wavered in his belief that the heir would one day surface. He had known Gerald Monroe. He had built the trust with him, clause by careful clause, in the months before the fire that killed him. He had stood at the edge of a crime scene that the police had been persuaded to classify as an electrical fault and felt, in his chest, the cold fury of a man who knows the truth and cannot yet prove it. The flight was a long-haul return from Geneva, where he had been finalizing a completely unrelated client matter, with the focused efficiency of a man who had learned how to live two lives at once, the one in front of him, and the one he was perpetually watching for in his peripheral vision. He had his phone on Do Not Disturb. He always did on long flights. He needed to sleep, and he needed to think, and neither was possible with the phone buzzing. He turned it back on at 30,000 feet, 1 hour from landing. The notifications came in a cascade. There were two that stopped him cold. The first was an automated alert from a security protocol he had embedded in the trust documentation 2 decades ago, a silent tripwire, invisible to anyone who didn't know it was there. The trust had been structured so that any attempt to activate the disbursement clause, any legal registration of a marriage involving the Monroe heir, would immediately trigger a notification to his personal account, flagged urgent, regardless of what time zone he was in. The Caldwell family's lawyer had filed the marriage certificate paperwork with the county clerk's office 3 hours ago, in advance of the ceremony. Routine legal preparation for a same-day registration. They had activated his system without knowing it existed. The second notification was a photograph. It had come to his personal address, the emergency contact line, the one printed in ink on a document that had lived in a cedar box at the bottom of a wardrobe for 20 years. The one that only the Monroe heir, or someone acting on her behalf with access to the original trust papers, would have known to use. He opened the image. A woman in a wedding dress. Young. In a corridor. The necklace at her throat unmistakable. Even at the angle of a quickly taken phone photograph, a gold pendant in the shape of the Monroe family crest. In the background, visible above a doorway, the Caldwell family name on a decorative plaque. Placement, identity, context. Everything he needed in one frame. The expression on her face was not what he expected. He had imagined, in the versions of this moment he had rehearsed over the years, that the heir would look frightened, desperate, reaching out because she had nowhere else to turn. This woman looked like someone ugly as someone who had already won and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. Raymond Osei set the phone face down on his tray table. He breathed for exactly 4 seconds. Then he picked up the phone again and pressed the call button for the flight attendant's extension. "I need to speak with the captain," he said. "I need to know the fastest possible arrival at the city airport within legal parameters. I have a time-sensitive legal matter." He was already pulling out his laptop. He had calls to make. He had a team to mobilize. He had an affidavit he had been keeping current for 20 years, updated annually, sitting in a sealed file in a fireproof drawer in his office, that his assistant had standing instructions to open if he ever sent her a single-word message. He sent it now. The word was Monroe. By the time the plane touched down 47 minutes ahead of its scheduled arrival, the captain having found a more direct approach path, Raymond's assistant had pulled the file and sent it to his phone in sections. His investigative consultant had been reached, though the man needed 10 minutes to locate the archived affidavit because Raymond, in a rare organizational failure, had mislabeled one of the folders 6 years ago. 2 associates from the firm's estate fraud division were on their way, one from the office, one pulled from a Saturday morning he would be reimbursed for, and a call had been placed to Detective Marsh in the city's financial crimes unit, who had been quietly cooperating with Raymond's parallel investigation for the past 6 years, and who answered the phone with, "I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. Give me 45 minutes. It took 50. The convoy left the airport in 3 black vehicles. Raymond was in the back of the first one, his laptop open, his tie loosened. A coffee from the airport kiosk growing cold in the cup holder because he hadn't had time to drink it. He had not slept on the plane. He had not eaten since Geneva. His eyes were the eyes of a man running on something older and more sustaining than rest. He had calls to make still, questions he could not yet answer, documents he had not yet reviewed, because his assistant was still scanning them from the fireproof drawer. He did not have everything perfectly prepared, the way he had always imagined this moment. He had enough. He had 20 years of enough. He would have to trust that it held together. When he walked through the door, Raymond sat in the back of the first car, his phone at his ear, talking through the sequence with his associate. Outside the window, the city moved past ordinary, unhurried, unaware. He would not stop until he was standing inside that hall. Inside the venue, the ceremony had begun. The ballroom was full. 200 guests, the cream of the Caldwell social world, arranged in white chairs with ribbon-tied programs, hats and heels and pocket squares, and the comfortable assumption that they were here to witness something joyful. The flower arch was correct. Whatever Victoria had said. The 6-tier cake was perfect. The string quartet was playing something tasteful and forgettable. Julian stood at the altar in a suit that cost $8,000, His expression was composed. His posture was impeccable. He looked, to anyone watching, like a man on the edge of a beautiful chapter. Aaliyah walked in alone. She had refused to have Julian's cousin escort her. She had refused, gently but absolutely, every suggestion about who should walk her down the aisle, because she had no father to do it, and she would not accept a substitute designed by the people trying to steal from her father's estate. She walked alone, and she walked slowly, and she walked with the stillness. She had always carried the stillness that made rooms get quieter when she entered them, though no one could ever explain afterward exactly why. Every person in that room watched her, some because she was beautiful, some because there was something about her bearing that demanded it, some the ones who had known her in the weeks since the engagement, who had participated in the small campaigns of exclusion and condescension because she looked different today than she had at any dinner or event or casual gathering. She looked like someone who had already arrived at a place that the rest of the room was still traveling toward. Victoria sat in the front row. Her expression was the warm, proud smile of a mother of the groom. Only her hands, folded in her lap and pressed slightly harder than necessary against each other, gave any indication that anything was happening inside her beyond maternal satisfaction. The ceremony proceeded. The officiant said the words that officiants say. Julian said his vows smooth, practiced, the words of a man who had rehearsed sincerity. Aaliyah said hers short, precise, each word chosen carefully and meaning, to anyone who understood what was actually happening in this room, something entirely different than it appeared. The rings were exchanged. The marriage certificate was signed. Julian's family lawyer, seated in the second row, immediately took a photograph of the document and sent it to the county clerk's office to complete the filing. This was the trigger. This was the moment the trust clause required. The moment the filing was confirmed, the moment a Monroe heir's legal marriage to a Caldwell family member was registered with the county, the trust's dormancy clause dissolved. $1 billion and 20 years of compounded interest became, legally and irrevocably, accessible. The groom's lawyer sent the confirmation to the trust's financial institution at the same time. He did not know, could not have known that this action simultaneously completed Raymond Osei's tripwire and generated a second automated alert to the Legal Oversight Committee that monitored frozen estate trusts for signs of fraudulent activation. He had just handed Raymond everything he needed to walk through that door with the full force of law behind him. He had done it himself, with his own hands, in front of 200 witnesses. In the black car pulling up to the venue, Raymond Osei's phone buzzed with the filing confirmation. He looked at it. He closed his laptop. "We're here," said the driver. The toast had just begun. Julian's best man, a broad-shouldered man named Christopher, who had known Julian since prep school and had always privately found Aaliyah unsettling in a way he couldn't articulate, was standing at the front of the room with a champagne flute and a prepared speech that was mostly jokes about Julian's dating history reframed as romantic growth. The guests laughed in the right places. The champagne was good. The light through the tall windows was the gold of a mid-morning sun that makes everyone feel, briefly, that they are living inside something beautiful. And then the doors opened. Not politely. Not the way doors open when a latecomer arrives and tries to be invisible. They opened the way doors open when someone has made the decision to open them fully and is not concerned about what the room thinks of the interruption. Raymond Osei walked in first. He was not a physically imposing man, medium height, silver-templed. The compact, careful build of someone who has spent 38 years making his presence felt through precision rather than volume. Behind him came two associates carrying document cases. Behind them, two individuals who were not lawyers, broader, quieter, with the bearing of people who had been authorized to make certain things happen in rooms that preferred they didn't. Behind them, at a slight remove, Detective Marsh and two officers. The string quartet, which had resumed playing softly during the toast, stopped one by one as they became aware of what was happening at the back of the room. The musicians didn't confer. They just stopped, instrument by instrument, the way sound drains from a space when something more serious arrives to fill it. Christopher stopped mid-sentence. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward the doors. Victoria Caldwell turned last. She turned the way people turn when they already know, before they see, that what is behind them is the thing they have been afraid of for a very long time. Raymond Osei walked down the center of the aisle. He did not look at Julian. He did not look at Victoria. He looked, with the intensity of a man arriving at the end of a 20-year journey, at the woman sitting at the head of the room in the white dress. He stopped 10 feet away from her, and Raymond Osei, 63 years old, 38 years of practiced composure, a man who had stood in courtrooms and boardrooms, and at the edges of crime scenes, and held himself absolutely level through all of it that man's eyes filled. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't look away. He stood there in front of 200 people, and let it happen. Because some things earn the right to be felt in public. Aaliyah Monroe, he said. His voice was steady despite everything else. I've been looking for you for 20 years. The room was completely silent. Aaliyah looked at him. She already knew who he was. She had read his name in the trust documents, had studied his firm's history, had sent her photograph to his emergency line with exactly this moment in mind. She was not surprised, but something happened in her face when she heard him say her father's name. Her real name. The name she had not been called by anyone who had known what it meant that was not performance and not calculation. It was older than the plan. It was the thing underneath all of it. The reason the plan existed. She stood up. She walked to meet him. He extended his hand. She took it. And then, because he was 63 years old and had known her father and had spent 2 decades carrying the weight of a wrong he could not yet right, he placed his other hand over hers and held on for a moment longer than a handshake requires. Your father was a good man, he said quietly. And everything he built is yours. She nodded, once. She did not cry. That was not who she was. But the line of her shoulders changed in some small way that anyone who had been watching her carefully, who had seen how contained she had been through the entire morning, would have recognized as the release of a woman who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just, for the first time, been allowed to set it down. Then Raymond turned to face the room. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room was so quiet that when he spoke at a normal register, it reached every corner. My name is Raymond Osei, he said. I am the senior partner of Raymond & Associates, the legal firm appointed to administer the Monroe Family Trust by its founder, Gerald Monroe, 22 years ago. I am here today in my capacity as legal guardian of that trust and as the authorized representative of its rightful heir. He paused. Let it settle. Gerald Monroe was murdered. His home was deliberately burned by persons contracted by an individual who stood to benefit from his death and the disappearance of his heir. That individual has spent 20 years in unlawful possession of assets that were never legally transferred, using financial instruments that were secured through fraud, and most recently orchestrating a marriage designed to trigger a trust activation clause. That would have allowed those assets to be accessed and subsequently stripped from the heir through a coercive prenuptial arrangement. He reached into the document case his associate held open for him. I have in my possession a forensic financial analysis establishing 20 years of fraudulent asset management, a restored thermal imaging report from the original fire scene confirming deliberate ignition with commercial-grade accelerant recovered this morning from City Archive data by a mechanical engineer named Daniel Carter, who I will be formally citing as a cooperating investigator. He paused. And a payment record recovered from a 20-year-old financial database connecting a wire transfer to a known arson contractor, made from an account held in the name of Victoria Caldwell, 48 hours before the Monroe family home burned to the ground. The room produced a sound that was not quite a gasp, and not quite silent something in between. The sound of 200 people simultaneously losing their certainty about where they were standing. Julian had not moved. He was still at the altar. His face had done something complicated, a kind of collapsing, like a building whose internal structure has been removed and the facade has not yet caught up with what has happened behind it. Victoria had not moved either. She was still in her champagne gown, still in her $3,000 heels. Still in the front row of the ceremony she had designed to be the final act of a 20-year plan. Her face was the color of old paper. Her hands in her lap, had stopped pressing against each other. They lay open, empty, very still. She was looking at Aaliyah, and Aaliyah was looking back at her. There are looks that contain entire conversations, entire histories. This one contained a fire, and a child carried out of it, and a woman with burned hands who kept running anyway, and 20 years of tea at 7 in the morning, and a cedar box at the bottom of a wardrobe, and a necklace that had been waiting to be recognized, and a plan built in a small kitchen over 2 hours, while a man who loved her sat across the table and asked her what she needed instead of telling her what to do. It contained all of that. And what it said, without any words, was, "I knew. I always knew the shape of you. And I built something stronger." Raymond continued. The prenuptial agreement signed by Aaliyah Monroe is hereby declared void under Section 14 of the State Estate Fraud Statute, executed under false pretenses, concealment of identity, and material misrepresentation of the legal landscape surrounding the trust. It has no enforceable standing. He nodded to the detective. Victoria Caldwell, Detective Marsh said, stepping forward, "You are under arrest for first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit arson, and 22 counts of estate fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The rest of the Miranda warning was delivered clearly, calmly, and completely, in front of 200 people who had come to this room to drink champagne and watch 2 people get married. Victoria did not resist. There was no version of Victoria Caldwell that included a scene. Even now, even here, at the absolute end of everything, she maintained the posture, the composure, the controlled stillness. It was only as the detective touched her arm to guide her to standing that she looked, one final time, at Aaliyah. And what passed across her face in that fraction of a second was not fury, not yet. It was something no one in that room expected, least of all Victoria herself. It was recognition. The look of a woman who has spent 20 years telling herself a story about who was to blame for everything she lost, and who sees, in the face of the person standing across from her, that the story was never true, that Gerald Monroe had not taken anything, that Charles had not been wronged, that she had made a choice, a long time ago, in a corridor not unlike this one, and had been making it every day since. It lasted less than a second. Then it closed, the way a door closes on something you were never going to speak of anyway. And what replaced it was fury, pure, undiluted, the fury of a woman who cannot bear to hold what she just saw, at having been outmaneuvered by the child she had tried to erase. She let the detective guide her to standing. She walked without assistance. She looked at no one else. Julian was taken next. He did not maintain composure. His legs seemed to lose their purpose when the second officer approached him, and he sat down heavily on the altar steps in his $8,000 suit and put his face in his hands. He was not, in this moment, a villain. He was something smaller and sadder. A man who had let his mother make every important decision of his life, and had now arrived at the destination that choice had always been leading to. The ballroom held its collective breath. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 200 people who had spent the past weeks attending dinners and events and pre-wedding celebrations within the Caldwell orbit stood very still in their chairs and tried to recalibrate every assumption they had made about where they were and what they had been part of. The trust manager, a heavy-set man named Garrett who had been seated near the back, was located by one of Raymond's associates and escorted with brisk efficiency toward the door. He did not make a scene. Men like Garrett rarely do. They calculate. And what he calculated was that his best remaining option was cooperation. And in the center of all of it, not moving, not performing, not watching the arrests with satisfaction or the room with triumph, stood Aaliyah Monroe. She was looking at the door, because Daniel had just walked through it. He was still in the catering crew jacket. He had been outside making the call and had come back through the service entrance the moment he heard Raymond's voice inside. He was wearing dark work pants and the canvas jacket he wore to the shop beneath it, and there was a faint trace of machine oil on the back of his right hand that he had not managed to fully remove. He looked completely out of place in this room full of expensive fabric and important people. He looked, to Aaliyah, like the most correctly placed person she had ever seen in her life. She didn't say anything. She didn't cross the room. She just looked at him from where she was standing, with Raymond beside her and the document case open and 200 witnesses around them, and the look she gave him contained its own full conversation, the same full history kind, compressed and certain. It said, "You did it. You held. You were there." He gave her the smallest nod she had ever seen a person produce. It said, "Of course I was." Raymond leaned toward her slightly and said, in a voice meant only for her, "There will be a great deal of paperwork. The next several weeks will be substantial, but the trust is yours. It has always been yours, and the legal path forward from here is, for the first time, completely clear." She looked at him. "What was the final number?" she said. "The trust." After 20 years of compounding, he paused for a moment in the way people pause before they say very large numbers to people who have not heard very large numbers said about themselves before. Then he told her. She was quiet for a moment. "That's a lot of bread," she said. Raymond Osei looked at her for a second. Then he laughed a real laugh, surprised out of him, the kind that has no performance in it whatsoever. In 38 years of estate law, in 20 years of waiting for this specific moment, he had not imagined it arriving with a joke about bread. But there it was. The heir was standing in a ruined wedding dress in a room full of people watching her in-laws get arrested, and she was making a quiet, dry joke, and it was the funniest and the realest and the most human thing that had happened in this hall all day. He was still smiling when he turned back to his associates to begin the formal documentation process. Aaliyah looked at the room, at the guests still seated, still silent, still processing, at the empty altar, where Julian had been, at the front row chair, where Victoria was no longer. She reached up, unclasped the necklace, held it in her palm for a moment, warm from her skin, worn smooth in places from being handled, this small object that had carried 20 years of truth inside its engraving. She closed her fingers around it. Then she walked to where the wedding ring had been placed in its small velvet dish, still waiting where it had sat when Julian stopped being able to stand. She picked it up. She walked to the table where the remnants of the spilled wine still sat in a damp circle at the edge, the aftermath of this morning's corridor scene that no one had thought to fully clean. She held the ring over the glass. She let go. It made a small, clear sound when it hit the bottom. A clean, final sound. The sound of something ending with exactly the precision it deserved. Then Aaliyah Monroe, orphan, baker, architect of her own deliverance, rightful heir to the Monroe family trust, turned her back on the altar, on the flowers, on the 6-tier cake, on the 200 people who were going to be telling this story at dinner parties for the next 10 years, and she walked out of the room, head up. Steps even, the dress still beautiful despite everything that had happened to it today, or maybe someone watching might have thought. Because of everything that had happened to it. The necklace clasped in her hand. She walked like a woman who knows exactly where she's going. Because she did. The legal proceedings moved with a speed that surprised people who didn't understand how thoroughly Raymond Osei had prepared for this. He had not simply been waiting. He had been building. For 20 years, quietly and without fanfare, he had been constructing the scaffolding of a case that he always believed would one day need to stand in a courtroom. Every year he updated the affidavit. Every year he maintained contact with the one detective willing to keep the investigation technically open. Every year he filed the annual trust documentation, each filing a small, persistent declaration that the Monroe estate existed, that its heir had not been declared legally dead, and that the door to justice remained, however narrowly, ajar. When Daniel Carter's 847 recovered files reached him the morning of the wedding, Raymond recognized them for what they were. The final keystone. Everything else had been in place for years. He had been waiting for the physical evidence of deliberate ignition, because without it, the financial fraud case was strong but the murder charge was circumstantial. With it, the entire structure was complete. The thermal imaging data told a story that required no interpretation. The fire had originated at 3 separate points simultaneously: the kitchen, the study, and the base of the main staircase. 3-point simultaneous ignition is not a pattern that occurs in electrical faults. It is not a pattern that occurs in accidents of any kind. It is a signature, the signature of someone who knew that a single point of origin gave survivors too much time. The accelerant analysis confirmed commercial-grade incendiary material, not residential. The kind available to contractors. The kind that required a supplier. And the payment record recovered from an archived financial database that Daniel had accessed through the city's industrial incident registry showed a wire transfer from a Victoria Caldwell holding account, made 48 hours before the fire, to a shell company that the Financial Crimes Unit had flagged in 3 separate unrelated investigations over the past decade and never been able to fully trace. Until now, the shell company dissolved 18 months after the fire. Its principal had died in an unrelated incident, 4 years later. But the money trail did not dissolve with it. Money, unlike people, leaves marks that do not decompose. It leaves routing numbers and timestamps and the permanent, patient record of where it went and who sent it. Victoria Caldwell was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit arson, 22 counts of estate fraud, and 2 counts of obstruction of justice related to the original investigation. The obstruction charges were the ones she had not anticipated. They related to a conversation, recovered from a telephone company archive, in which she had spoken to the lead investigator on the original fire case 3 days after it occurred. A conversation that had lasted 47 minutes and had resulted, the following week, in the case being reclassified from suspicious to accidental. Julian was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and coercion specifically. The prenuptial arrangement executed under the conditions Raymond had already documented. His lawyer entered a cooperation agreement within 72 hours. Julian, it turned out, was willing to say a great deal in exchange for a reduction in exposure. He was, in the end, exactly what he had always appeared to be. A man who had never made a single independent decision in his life, and could not begin now. Garrett, the trust manager, cooperated fully and immediately. He had been skimming fees from the frozen trust for 11 years, a slow, careful embezzlement that he had calculated would never be detected because he believed the trust would never be activated. He had calculated wrong. The financial forensics team found it in 3 days. He was charged separately and pled guilty to avoid trial. The Caldwell family home was seized pending the conclusion of the fraud proceedings. The cars, the accounts, the art on the walls, the contents of the safety deposit boxes, all of it frozen, inventoried, documented the physical accumulation of 2 decades of a life built on a crime that had finally run out of room to hide. Victoria Caldwell was remanded without bail. The prosecution argued, successfully, that a woman of her resources and organizational capacity presented a significant flight risk. She was photographed outside the courthouse in the champagne gown she had still been wearing when she was processed. She had refused, with the consistency of someone whose dignity is the last thing they have left, to change. The photograph ran in the financial press. The society columns, the same publications that had covered the Caldwell family's charitable endeavors and gala appearances for 30 years, ran the photograph of Victoria in handcuffs outside a courthouse, and wrote about it with the slightly breathless tone of people who are astonished by something they should have seen coming. Aaliyah did not read those articles. She was busy. She had been back at the bakery the morning after the wedding. This was not a statement. It was not a performance of resilience or a symbol of anything. It was simply that the bread needed to be made, and she was the one who made it, and that had not changed because of anything that had happened in a ballroom the day before. She was at the workbench at 4 a.m, flour on her forearms, the radio on low, the oven already warming behind her. The necklace was on the counter beside her in its velvet cloth, because she had not yet decided what to do with it now that its work was done. It had spent 20 years as a key. Now it was something else. A relic, maybe. Or a monument to the woman who had carried it through fire and kept it safe until the right moment arrived. She was going to have a case made for it. Something worthy of what it was. She had not decided on the details yet. Raymond had called the evening before with the initial trust figures confirmed. He had walked her through the immediate steps, the account structures, the legal timeline, the transition plan his team had prepared for exactly this eventuality. It was thorough. It was meticulous. It was the work of a man who had spent 20 years making sure that when this day came, the heir would not be navigating it alone. She had listened carefully. She had asked 3 questions, all of them practical. She had thanked him with the directness that she brought to everything, which he was already understanding meant more, coming from her, than effusive gratitude from anyone else. Then she had hung up and gone to bed. She needed sleep. Tomorrow, the bread needed making. Now she was making it, and the morning was quiet. And through the front window of the bakery the streetlights were still on, and the city was still in that stillness of the hour before it wakes up and becomes itself again. She heard the light in the shop across the street come on. 5:15 in the morning. Daniel was early today. She looked at the window. She looked at her hands, still working the dough. She looked at the window again. She didn't react right away, not because she wasn't feeling it, but because she had always understood that the most important things in life are not best handled in a hurry. She finished the loaf she was working on. She shaped it. She set it in the pan. She slid it into the oven. Then she washed her hands. She walked to the front of the shop, unlocked the door, and crossed the street. The shop was its usual organized chaos: workbenches covered in half-finished jobs, tools hung with the precision of someone who knows where everything is even if no one else can see the system. Daniel was at the main bench, his back to the door, doing something to a small motor with what appeared to be complete absorption. He hadn't heard her come in over the sound of the diagnostic equipment running. She stood in the doorway for a moment. She thought about Ruth, who had loved her without conditions and shown her what it meant to give something completely without keeping score. She thought about her father, who she had never known but whose love for the things he built, the trust, the estate, the careful provisions for the heir he had not yet met, had survived his death and waited for her across 20 years. She thought about what it meant to love someone well, not loudly, not desperately, but with consistency and presence and the integrity of someone who shows up, again and again, without needing credit for the showing up. She thought about a man who had knocked on her door on a Thursday night with something terrible to tell her, and had told it plain, who had sat across a kitchen table and asked her what she needed, and then provided it, who had rebuilt a 20-year crime from recovered data in 7 days in a machine shop across the street, who had been pushed out of a wedding hall and had stood there and made the call that needed making, and who had walked back through the door at the right moment, in the wrong clothes, looking completely correct. She thought about all of that. And then, because she was Aaliyah Monroe, she stopped thinking and did the practical thing. "Daniel," she said. He turned. He had not heard her come, and his expression showed the brief adjustment of a man recalibrating from deep focus, and then it settled into something quieter and more careful when he saw it was her. "Hey," he said. She looked at him across the workbench and the tools and the distance that he had always maintained with such care, because he was a man who understood the difference between what he felt and what he had the right to act on. She had something to say to him. She had been composing it, loosely, in the hour of bread-making, not rehearsing it. Exactly, because she did not rehearse things she meant, just letting it find its shape, the way dough finds its shape, through pressure applied with the right kind of hands. "You sat across my kitchen table," she said, 7 days ago, "and I asked you for something very specific. I asked for a partner, not a protector, and you gave me exactly what I asked for, without resentment and without an ego about it." She paused. "Do you know how rare that is?" He held her gaze. He didn't fill the space with a deflection. He just waited. "I have spent my whole life," she said, "making sure I did not need anyone in a way that made me vulnerable, because the people I needed most left one way or another. And I decided very young that the safest thing was to be capable enough that the gap never got big enough to fall into." She looked down at the workbench for a moment, then back up. "You are the first person in my adult life who made me want to renegotiate that." Something moved across Daniel's face. He still didn't speak. He was the kind of man who understood that some moments belong to the person who started them, and that the right thing to do is not interrupt. "I am a different person than I was a week ago," she continued. "I have resources I haven't fully understood yet. I have legal proceedings that will take years. I have a bakery that I am not closing, and a necklace I'm having put in a case, and a mother I am burying properly, with a headstone that says her real name. She steadied herself. Just slightly. I do not have a map for what the next part of my life looks like. I have never had money. I have never had that kind of freedom, and I will need time to learn what to do with it. She looked at him directly now. What I do know, she said, is that I want to find out what this is. Between us. Slowly. Because I do not know how to do things any other way. With no debt between us and no pretense and no one performing anything for the other. She stopped. Let the last part land plainly. If you want that too. The shop was quiet. The diagnostic equipment hummed at a low frequency. Outside, the street was just beginning to lighten. That first grey suggestion of a sun still 20 minutes from appearing. Daniel set down the tool in his hand with great care. He came around the workbench. He stopped at a respectful distance because he was always going to be a man who respected distance, and he looked at her with the expression of someone who has been asked, finally, to say out loud the thing he has been carrying carefully and in private for a very long time. I have wanted to tell you something, he said. For about 2 years. She waited. I just kept deciding it wasn't the right moment, he said. And then I kept finding reasons why it still wasn't the right moment. And then a week ago you sat across your kitchen table and laid out one of the most extraordinary plans I have ever heard, and I thought if I don't say it now, I am going to run out of moments. He had not said it yet. He did not have to. It was already in the room with them, had been in the room with them for the past 2 years of 6:45 morning coffee, and exact change and white dahlias on a funeral step, and a man sitting in the dark of his shop very late, thinking about things he could not unthink. She took 1 step toward him, closed part of the distance. He took 1 step toward her, closed the rest. The necklace was back at the bakery on the counter in its velvet cloth. The bread was in the oven. The city was beginning its slow return to itself outside the windows of a machine shop across the street from a bakery where 2 people were, at 5:20 in the morning, finding the shape of something they had both been keeping for a very long time. Real love does not begin with a contract. It does not begin with declarations or ceremonies or any of the formal architecture that people build around the things they are afraid to simply name. It begins with trust. With a man who asks what you need instead of deciding what you need. With a woman who knows the difference between someone who loves her and someone who wants to own her. With 2 people who spent 7 days dismantling a 20-year injustice. Side by side. Without losing their respect for each other. For a single moment of it. It begins like bread. Slowly. With the right pressure. With patience. And it is good. The bakery sign was new, not large. She had never wanted something large, but it was there now, proper and clean above the window where faded paint had been, with the name in a simple, elegant font that had taken her 3 weeks to choose. Monroe's. Just that. No slogan, no flourish. Ruth Monroe, born Evelyn Grace, called Ruth the day she ran and never stopped running, had been given a proper burial in the 3rd week of the month following the wedding. A small headstone in a quiet cemetery, with both her names on it. The one she was born with, recovered through the same archival research that had uncovered everything else, and below it, the name she had chosen for herself in the years she had spent keeping Aaliyah safe. The stone was grey granite. Simple. At the base, 4 words Aaliyah had chosen herself. She chose to run. She went there sometimes in the early morning, before the bakery opened. She brought the good tea, the kind Ruth had liked, in a thermos. She sat for a while. She talked, some days, about the ordinary things, the bread, the shop, what Daniel had said about the broken compressor he was rebuilding, what Raymond had said in the latest legal update. The things a daughter tells a mother when the mother is simply in another room, and not somewhere too far to reach. She believed, without needing to justify it to anyone, that Ruth could hear the important parts. The trust was in the process of formal transfer. It would take another 8 months, Raymond estimated, for the full legal proceedings to conclude. She had access to an initial tranche enough, and more than enough, but she had not moved. Not yet. She was still deciding what moving looked like. She had ideas. She had been having ideas for weeks, careful and considered and practical, the way she approached everything. She was going to fund a scholarship. Several, eventually for young women who aged out of the foster care system without the resources to find their footing. She had been that person, or near enough, that the difference felt technical. She knew what the gap looked like from the inside. She knew what would have helped her, specifically. And she suspected what helped one person helped many. She was going to renovate the bakery properly. New equipment. A proper commercial kitchen. Maybe, eventually, a second location, not because she needed the expansion, but because she liked making bread. And she liked having a place that smelled like warmth. And she did not see a good reason to stop doing the thing she was good at, simply because she no longer needed the income from it. She was going to take a trip. Not a luxury trip. She had no interest in the performance of wealth that she had watched the Caldwell family use as a substitute for character. She wanted to go somewhere quiet. She had never left the city for more than 3 days in her life. She wanted to see what the rest of the world looked like from the outside. She thought she might ask Daniel if he wanted to come. The morning the sign went up, she stood across the street and looked at it. Just the word, clean and clear above the window. Monroe's, her father's name, her name, Ruth's name, the name that had survived a fire and 20 years hidden in a cedar box, and a photograph sent from a marble corridor in a wedding dress, and the careful, unrelenting work of a 63-year-old lawyer who had spent 2 decades being ready. Daniel came and stood beside her. He had flour on his jacket from helping carry the sign's mounting bracket, which she had asked him to assist with, and which he had done without making it into anything other than the practical task it was. He looked at the sign. She looked at the sign. "Good," he said. "Yes," she said. The street was ordinary and bright around them. People walked past with their mornings in their hands, coffee, phones, the slight forward lean of people going somewhere they needed to be. A child on a bicycle wobbled past with extraordinary concentration. A dog pulled at its lead toward the bakery window, drawn by the smell of the first batch of the morning. Aaliyah watched all of it with the quality of attention she had always brought to the world, the quality that had made her notice, from a very young age, the things that most people look at without seeing. The way a room changes when one person in it stops pretending. The way silence sounds different when it is full instead of empty. The way the strongest position is always the quietest one. Comment here if you knew right from that very first moment in the corridor, when she was on her knees with that ghost of a smile on her face, that Aaliyah Monroe was never the one in danger, that she was the one in control, because she was. She always had been. The bread was ready. She could smell it from here. That warm-edged scent that had been the background note of her whole life. The smell that meant morning, that meant work, that meant something being built with care and patience, and the right pressure applied at the right time. She turned from the sign. She had bread to make. She had people to feed. She had a life that was, for the first time, fully her own, not fought for, not defended, not managed around the edges of someone else's plan for her, just hers. She pushed open the door. The bell above it rang, the way it always had. She went inside. Years later, when people asked her about it in the interview she eventually agreed to, only because Raymond thought it might help other women in similar legal situations understand what was possible. She paused for a moment before she answered. "I would say," she said, "that being cornered is not the same as being trapped. A corner has walls behind you, but it also has a full view of the room, and if you can be still enough, for long enough, you will see exactly where the door is." She paused. "The other thing I would say," she added, "is find your Daniel. Not someone who will fight your battles. Someone who will hand you the weapon and stand at your back while you fight it yourself." She thought about that for a second. "And make sure he likes bread," she said. "Is there a Daniel in your life, someone who shows up quietly and gives you exactly what you need without needing credit for it? Drop their name in the comments. Let's celebrate the people who show up right.